This is Tuesday, February the 16th. This is American history. World War I was uniquely different than most wars fought in Europe. It would be a war in which tactics would change. It would be a war in which technology and science will make the art of killing people far easier than it had been in the 19th century. A couple of the inventions that will be talked about in the video on the next slide is the use of the tank. The tank was created to go over the trenches. The use of the airplane. The airplane was first used for observation, then used to bomb the other side, and then used to shoot down other airplanes. The use of artillery. Artillery was able to shoot shells a whole lot farther and a whole lot more accurate than it had been in the 19th century. With artillery also came poison gas. Gas that would be in two canisters, and when the two canisters mixed, they would create a gas that was toxic and people would die from. The use of the submarine. Submarines were used by both sides, but the Germans were far more efficient at the use of the submarine. The use of machine guns. A gun that could shoot hundreds of bullets a minute as long as you could keep feeding it with ammunition. Now again, this video here talks about all of these. Starting in 1915, both the Allies and the Central Powers are going to lose hundreds of thousands of men near the French city of Verdun, along the Somme and the Marne River. Now, if you're going to fight a war, what are the requirements? Well, you're going to need money. Wars are incredibly expensive. You're going to need arms, the guns that are necessary to defeat the other person. And you're going to need raw materials, those things necessary to make the arms. Now, of course, the United States was abundant in all of these, but Wilson has pledged that we would remain neutral. Most of our businesses, though, sold to both sides. There's only one major naval battle that we're going to place in our notes, and this is a battle that did not involve the United States. It's called the Battle of Jutland. Now, Jutland is what the Germans called the waterway off the coast of Denmark, where the Baltic Sea entered. You can see from this video, or you can see from this diagram, that the Germans in red are going to come out of Hamburg, Germany. They are going to meet the British, who have come out in blue. Although both sides will claim victory, the Germans will never send their surface navy out again in great numbers, so we have to call this a British victory. Here is how the victory is explained in a video. Now, because of the Battle of Jutland, this is going to change how both sides will use their navy. The British and the Allies now have total control of the surface. So as any ship were to approach a central power port, the British or French or Italians or whoever the Allies are, they could stop these ships with their surface navy. The Germans are going to rely more on their submarine force. Now, back in those days, submarines were quite easy to destroy. They did not go too far below the surface of the water. they could not stay underwater for long periods of time. So the submarine would go below the water just at sunrise, and it would look for its target, and it would try to get the target early in the morning or late in the evening, where the submarine could put the sun at the back of the submarine and thus make the ship silhouette. Now, during the evening, the submarines could come above water and recharge their batteries. Now, the Germans found that if they poked their periscope up too long, that the British or the French would see it. The Germans also discovered that if they surfaced the ship to try to allow the enemy to dislodge whatever people they had on the board ship first, they found that other ships could bomb them. So the Germans are going to start a practice called unrestricted submarine warfare. This is where the Germans are going to tell everybody that if you're on an Allied ship and you're within this area, you're going to see that ship sunk without notice. Now, one of the casualties of this was the Lusitania. The Lusitania was a British passenger ship. It was torpedoed off of the coast of Ireland in 1915. Now, over 1,000 passengers are going to die. Of them, 128 will be Americans. Now, the Lusitania was carrying guns and ammunition from the United States to Great Britain. But was Germany justified? Well, that's basically what this video is going to talk about. Now, the killing of the Americans is going to inflame the United States. We are going to hear from many politicians that we should go to war against Germany. Now, Wilson feared that American entry into the war would cost a large number of American lives. Wilson was concerned that America would lose people at the same rate that the Allies and Central Powers were. He wrote a letter to the German Kaiser, and the German Kaiser pledged that the Germans would not sink neutral passenger ships. In other words, if you were American and you were on an American passenger ship, then that ship would not be sunk. And the Americans pledged that they would check to make sure that American passenger ships were not carrying goods for either side. This is what we call the Arabic Pledge. Now, I have to tell you that both sides are going to cheat on the Arabic Pledge. In 1915, Wilson is going to send a close personal friend, Edward House, to negotiate a peace between the various European nations. Wilson hoped that House, being a neutral, could speak to both sides. Both sides agreed to listen to House, but both sides agreed that the war would continue on. The U.S. is going to propose the Sussex Pledge. Now, the Sussex Pledge was made after a French passenger ship would be sunk. The idea was that all sides would avoid conflict against any ship. Both sides would not agree with this, and the war continued on. In 1916, it is time for a presidential election year, and the Democrats are going to renominate Woodrow Wilson, and Wilson is going to run on what he calls his progressive ideas. During this convention, one of the people who spoke on behalf of Wilson is going to use a phrase in which he said that Wilson kept us out of war. The phrase got a lot of applause, and for the rest of the convention and for all of the time that people talked about Wilson, they would always end their speech with, "He kept us out of war." Now, Wilson never really uttered this phrase. This would be Wilson's campaign slogan during the war. The Republicans are going to choose this man, Charles Evans Hughes. Hughes had been a Supreme Court justice. Hughes campaigned on progressive ideas, but Hughes did not talk much about Germany. The red states are Mr. Wilson. The blue states are Mr. Hughes. Now, you can see from both popular vote and electoral college vote, it is very close. Now, remember, in those days, we elected in November, but we did not inaugurate until March. In the time period in between, the Germans are going to send a coded message to Mexico. Now, the idea was that if Mexico would start up its war against the United States, the war that had ended when Obregón became the leader of Mexico, that Germany would give aid to the Mexicans, and when the Germans won the war, the Germans would see to it that California, New Mexico, Arizona, and parts of Colorado, Utah, and Nevada would be given back to Mexico. This is what we called in the fall semester the Mexican Cession. Well, Mexico said no, and Mexico alerted Washington, D.C. to the note. Now, we call it the Zimmerman note because Zimmerman is the foreign minister of Germany. Germany began to sink ships without warning. And in 1917, Wilson is going to call for an act of war. Not all of Congress agreed, but enough of Congress did, that war was declared on Germany and the Central Powers in April of 1917. Well, I think this would probably be a good place for us to end.